Hello, and welcome to another edition of Proselytize or Apostatize. I'm your host, David Russell, along with my co-host, David Paulman. What's up, David?
How are you doing, Russell?
I'm good, man. How you been?
Oh, I've been good. Working my rear end off at the job and still trying to keep up with my reading. And I got 3 more debates on Calvinism coming up.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
telling you, I'm just going to be so happy to switch gears and study something besides Calvinism.
Yeah. What are you going into next?
I got a lot of books on the problem of evil, so I would like to study that a little more. Because I have like a good basic like popular level knowledge on like problem of evil, but I know there's like a lot of more sophisticated formulations of the problem, and so I do want to like get into that some more. And so I may start turning from like exegetical stuff back to philosophical stuff.
There you go. Yeah, and I'm sure our guest that's on today would love to hear some of that. But we have a very special guest. We have a skeptic. His name is Darren Lute. Say hi, Darren.
Hi, Darren.
So we've been emailing back and forth with Darren, or I have, for about a month or two now. And he decided he wanted to come on here, or he's been asking to come on here and debate a Christian on what, demonstrating Christianity, basically being able to demonstrate that it's accurate. That's a good definition for what we've been talking about, right, Darren?
Yeah, you've got another way to put that is to the difference between the map and the place. You've got the place, and then you've got the map as what you're drawing about that place, and just as showing that the map accurately portrays the place that you're drawing.
Yeah. Sounds pretty much like what we've been emailing. Maybe we'll be able to go over some of the stuff we've had in the email and be able to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But I just want to first just introduce you. I know we met through Titus, who started an email chain with us, and then we had somebody come on that was wanting to debate you or something that was in the works, and the guy just kind of disappeared on us, and me and you kept talking. So it was kind of funny that happened, and you turned me on to Skeptics and Seekers, which I was on today earlier, pretty much talking about the same thing, and it was pretty fun. I did learn one interesting thing about myself. I speak Christianese sometimes, and David Johnson was great about pointing that out, especially towards the end of our talk. And I mean, it was humbling, and it was a good experience, and we had a lot of laughs and a lot of good time, and I'm glad that you introduced us, Darren. Thanks for that.
Yeah, I like David. He was Christian for like 40 years, so he recognizes when people are. He straddles both worlds fairly well.
Yeah. And for those that don't know what Christianese is, it's when you're in the church setting so long, there's certain like phrases and words you use to describe certain like caveats of Christianity, and it's hard for somebody on the outside to kind of like know what you're talking about because you're just kind of like speaking in that lingo, and it happens. And I thought I was conscious of it, but apparently I'm not, and I realized that today, which was kind of humbling. So I know David's getting a kick out of me over here.
No, it's just relatable because I'm a pastor's kid, so I had many experiences where I would like just talk about things like justification and stuff like that, and just expected people to know what I was talking about, and people are like, "What?"
Yeah, right. So, Darren, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've never been a Christian, so if I start looking curious and asking what you're talking about when you get into your Christianese, that would be why. I'm a web developer at the moment, and I've been sort of following the whole Christian thing for, the past 20 years or so, just because it's, 80% of the population is Christian, and you can't turn around without running into it. So,
all right.
And so I've looked over most of the arguments. Some of them sound good, some of them don't. And at this point in my life, I'm just mostly interested in less in what the arguments are and more in, okay, how do we go about determining that the arguments actually point to something real?
Yeah, I hear you. That's a good place to start. So, David, I'm going to give it to you real quick because you had this idea of laying out a classical case, because we are classical apologists, so you don't have to deal with any presuppositionalists. But
That's a relief.
yeah, right. So, David, why don't you start by just laying out a case, because I mean, me and you are both classical apologists, so I'm pretty much on board with a lot of your stuff. So go ahead.
All right. Well, I mean, I'm not going to lay out the full case, obviously, because that would take a long time, but I'll just kind of say how the reasoning goes. I think, probably Darren, and I don't know him as well as you do because I haven't been in a lot of contact with him, but I'm assuming he would be skeptical, and I'm a skeptical person by nature, and so I think we would have some common ground with this issue of skepticism. And philosophical skepticism, we have these questions about how do we know anything at all? Because as we kind of go through life, we have some childhood beliefs, and we learn that these beliefs are false, or some of them are false. And so this can, raise questions for people who are interested in truth. Well, then, how do I actually know anything? And well, I know this because of this, but how do I know that? And so it goes back and back and back until eventually we got to reach some kind of foundation that we build knowledge on. And so when we come to the place that truth exists, and I'm not going to build a case for classical foundationalism here, I'm pretty much presupposing classical foundationalism for the sake of this discussion, then we kind of get into these metaphysical questions, all right? And specific to Christianity would be, does God exist? And so, if you have that truth exists, then you move from that to that God exists. And so, we bring in a lot of arguments for that. We've got the ontological argument, the cosmological argument, well, several cosmological arguments, teleological arguments, moral arguments, arguments from reason, or epistemological arguments. So we've got a lot of interesting arguments there that we think give us good reasons to believe that God exists. And so from there, it becomes a question of miracles. Can miracles happen? Because if Christianity is true, it's a religion of miracles. Indeed, the truth of it depends on miracles, as the New Testament is explicit on that point. So we, have to get into questions of, well, can you really have miracles? If there are miracles, how do you recognize miracles? How do you even define miracles? And then, when is, can a miracle really be a good form of divine revelation? Questions like that. And I think, we can answer those sorts of questions well. And so we move from there to kind of how reliable then are Christian-specific documents, which would be the New Testament. And you have questions about textual reliability. Do we even have now what they wrote then? Are these even written by people who are in a position to know what they're talking about? And these are all, if we can kind of get that the New Testament is not a bunch of fiction and that there's at least some kind of historical core there, then we can really move to evaluate the core question, which is, did Jesus rise from the dead? And if we have basic core claims of the New Testament that are true, so we have Jesus claiming to be God, Jesus doing miracles, and we can establish that he rose from the dead, that gives some divine authority to Jesus. And so then Jesus is functioning as literally divine revelation. And that is essentially what, Christianity is in the end of it, that's the epistemic foundation for it. And of course, as believers, we know that, there's the personal relationship part of that, which unfortunately, a lot of evangelicals and fundamentalists jump right to this, you got to have a relationship with Jesus, and kind of ignore everything that I just went through before that. And I think that's a mistake. But that's kind of what the basic case looks like. And of course, there's a lot of details there, and we could spend this whole discussion focusing on any one of those, but that's kind of how we get from skepticism, where you are, Darren, to where we're at.
Yeah, so Darren, I'm going to let you respond to that and kind of let you, David laid out a very general map, and I'm just going to let you take it from there and pick and choose where you want to go. Because like I said, this is very informal today, and we're just kind of like hanging out, talking as a group of guys. So go ahead, Darren.
All right. My video froze for after raised from the dead, but I can work with what happened before then. Okay. So if I all of a sudden go quiet, you know what's going on. I don't know. The problem with this train of thought is that there's no real solid basis for it. He mentioned that arguments give us a good reason to believe, but only if you accept the premises as true, and no one's, as far as I've been able to tell, have ever been able to demonstrate that the premises are actually true. And that's sort of where I'm at. For example, when you're talking about miracles. Whenever I look into a miracle claim, the person reporting it is never reporting everything that happened with that miracle. And then as soon as you start getting into a lot more of the details, it becomes a lot less miraculous, the more details that you learn about it. The text is great. And I know that Paul said that 200 people saw Jesus raised from the dead. But how do you get from Paul saying it to verifying that Paul was actually telling the truth? So from what I've been able to tell, the arguments start out presupposing a few things, not demonstrating that the premises are true, and then that leads into miracles, which are unconvincing the more you learn about them, into the text, which the Christian never seems to be able to actually demonstrate are accurate, into then you're working with the assumptions that Jesus actually rose from the dead, and that's what you base your faith on. But your faith is based on items that you can't actually demonstrate are accurate. I mean, the moral argument's a great example of that. One of the premises is that objective morality exists, and yet I have yet to find anyone who can demonstrate that objective morality exists, because anytime you ask them to demonstrate that that's actually exists, they say, okay, well, what do you feel about this moral question? And as far as I can tell, if you're asking me, then it's subjective by definition. And then you ask them, okay, so why do you think that asking me my opinion on a moral question demonstrates that it's objective? And then they say, oh, well, we've got this sensus divinitatis, and God has written your morality on your heart. Well, that's fine, but no one's actually demonstrated that's true yet. So you can't show that morality is objective because of this writing on the heart if you can't first demonstrate that anything was actually written on your heart in the first place. And that's sort of where I stand as far as the normal Christian lead up to trying to prove that Christianity is true.
All right, I see David over there pondering. What do you want to say, David, in response to the case he laid out for you? I'll let you go first.
Well, it seemed like the most details were on the moral argument. I don't know, is that where we want to go
miracles?
First?
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, we're there on miracles.
You can start wherever you want. The moral argument was just what happened to pop into my mind because it's sort of the most obvious.
No, it's fine. I mean, we can go wherever you want on this. I was just, if that's where you want to go, then I'll give some pushback. But if you want to talk about a different point, then I won't focus on moral argument.
I will go with whatever you think is you have the strongest case for, because quite honestly, the strongest case is the most interesting, because if your strongest case doesn't work, then there's no reason to think the rest of the weaker cases work.
All right, go ahead, David. What do you think?
Am I giving pushback on what you said, or am I?
Pushback? Yeah, this is just a conversation, man. So, yeah, go for it.
All right, so let's go back to this issue then about morals existing. I agree, or objective morality existing. I agree that that's an important part of the moral argument, and it certainly was what kept me from embracing it as a sound argument for a while. Because you brought up this question of people say, well, how do you feel about this, that, or the other thing? And so you said that makes it subjective by definition. That's exactly how I used to think about it. But what if I ask you what color, my shirt is, or what color the wall is, or what color the house is? Is that subjective?
It depends, because color is a light wave, so you can actually measure that light wave and get an objective answer to that.
Only by using your sense of sight.
Sure, but that's just because sight's being used doesn't automatically make it subjective. It's when you're going into the opinion of what you're seeing that makes it subjective. But we do know objective things. That's how we've got electricity and video on this call and that kind of thing. So we do understand how the difference between objective and subjective. And just because it's going through our eyes doesn't automatically make it subjective.
Yeah, I agree with that. Now, so then this was the question that I couldn't answer then, is why is, saying if, say, I'm wearing a blue shirt, I can believe that my shirt is blue, right? And I don't think that that's just a subjective opinion. I think my shirt is objectively blue. Well, then, if I see or I sense that murder is wrong, why is it wrong then to say that murder is wrong in the same sense when it seems as clear to me that it's wrong to murder a person as it is that my shirt is blue?
Well, the best definition of subjective I've ever come across is that objective is what still exists when there are no people around to observe it. So if there are no people around to observe it, then is murder still wrong? I mean, because murder is between two conscious people. So without those conscious people, I mean, is it wrong when a lion murders an elk? I mean, it's just how things go. So if you're saying that murder is wrong objectively, then is it wrong when God murdered the entire planet in a flood? And if that's no, then you're automatically in subjective territory, because murder is no longer wrong when God does it, but it's wrong when we do it. So you've got two different criteria there. That there's no objectivity there.
So why would, hold on, just why would murder be wrong if God did it, if he's the one that actually authors life and takes life? And for him, taking people's lives, even whether it be through a flood or whatnot, is just a change in location for him. It's not like it's not murder in that regard, because they're just going from one plane of existence to another, if God is real, right?
Well, okay, but you're talking about relative morality there, because morality is different for God than it is for humanity. And
but no, we're not. We're actually, those type of laws don't. When it comes to giving and taking life, those laws apply differently to God, because he's the giver of that life, and through him is where we get our moral basis anyway.
Right, and I understand that argument.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
But what you're describing there is relative morality, because morality is different for God than it is for us. So I get the argument, but what I'm saying is that what you're describing there is relative morality. And if it's okay for God to murder because it's just a transfer of a person from one location to another, then what's wrong with humans murdering? It's just a transfer of a person from one location to another, right?
Yeah. So, David, what do you think? Let me get your opinion before I give my next.
Well, I purposely picked the word murder there because that murder can be defined as unlawful killing. That is killing. So not all killing is murder, but all murder is killing, right? Killing is a broader spectrum. So God doesn't commit murder in the sense that he can kill people unlawfully. At least, if we say that God is the source of morality, because then moral laws have their very basis in the nature of God. And so God, therefore, could not violate these. So if God were to kill someone, it would only be if the person merited it. But there's an even bigger point to be made here. Let's just say, for the sake of this argument, because I'm not even talking Christian specific here. I mean, this is just generic theism I'm arguing for right now. What if it was immoral for God to destroy the world in a worldwide flood? Well, at best, that just means we toss out, that story in the Old Testament, or, maybe we toss out the Bible, toss out Christianity. Okay, but that doesn't get you off the hook of saying that, we still have this objective morality that we have to account for, and that this at least leads to God, which, remember, at this point is all I'm trying to argue for. So, yeah, I mean, we can just, for now, say, sure, it was immoral for God to murder people in a worldwide flood and, get that off the table. But you still have to answer this question of objective morality and whether that leads to God. You haven't explained why it's okay to believe that, that you can trust your sense of sight, that if you see something with your eyes, it's okay to believe it. But if you sense something as morally wrong, then all of a sudden that's subjective and you can't believe it. You have to have some kind of criteria for why it's okay to believe what you see, but not what you sense morally.
Well, I think that's sort of a shifting of the burden, because I'm not the one that's claiming that morality is either objective or subjective. I'm asking the Christian to demonstrate that morality is in fact objective, because that's what the argument claims. So it doesn't really matter my opinions on the subject. when you're seeing something through your eyes, we know that there's a world. We've got photons. The photon hits the back of the eye. It does some things in the brain, and that's how we perceive what we're seeing. When you say you perceive objective morality, how do you know that what you're perceiving is actually objective?
Okay, so all of what you just described, you know that through your eyes. You don't know about photons. You don't know about how light waves function in the eye. And I'm sorry, I'm not an expert on how all of that works, but all of that is detected through your eyes. So you can't use your eyes to prove that your eyes are reliable, because I mean, you're immediately begging the question there. So you do believe that your sense of sight is correct. So I'm just saying that it's inconsistent if you're going to believe that your eyes are giving you accurate information to then believe that your conscience is not giving you accurate information. Now, if you want to, play skeptic and say, okay, yeah, I can't trust what my eyes are saying, then, and you also aren't going to trust what you sense is moral, or the moral sense that you have, if you're not going to trust both, then you're being consistent. But what I'm saying is it's inconsistent to trust one and not trust the other.
Yeah, and I have no clue how you come to that conclusion. Because a moral sense is not something that's, I mean, we're talking objective versus subjective here, and comparing sight and the sense of morality is just not the same thing. Because we know how light works, we know how photons work, we know how light wavelengths work. What exactly is the objective of morality that we are sensing? Because if you go to the Middle East, it is objectively okay to put a woman in a bag and beat her half to death if she gets out of it. 500 years ago, it would be objectively okay to own another human being as property. Now we don't think that. So where do I go to find the exact objective morality that exists out there? Because if we want to check for the objectivity of light and the eyes, we can do that. We've got machines that can detect all those items, and we've got the science to understand how it works, why it works, the physics behind how it works. We can use it to create YouTube videos. We can do all of this thing because there's an actual objective world out there that we can explore, and we can figure out how it works. So what I'm asking for the Christian who's claiming that morals are objective is, how do you demonstrate that what you're claiming you are sensing as objective is accurate?
Okay, let me answer that question then, since you put it that way. The question would be that morals are objective in the same way that the physical world is objective, and it's simply because you sense it.
Except we don't.
So, well, I mean, in fact, we do. At least I do. I sense that murder is wrong. I sense that rape is wrong. I sense that theft is wrong. And
other people would say that those things aren't wrong. So how do I determine what the objective truth is? Are they objectively right because they don't believe those things are wrong? Or are you objectively right because you do believe those things are wrong? How do we go about determining which is the objective truth there?
Right. And I mean, I think this is going to come back to, if, you see something and somebody else doesn't see it, are you therefore not justified in believing it? I mean, it would be one thing, obviously, if, you had good reasons, other people who, can't see other things and you're just seeing this one thing, that might be, or you have seen this one thing, that might be evidence that, you had a hallucination or something. So we do know that there are cases of that. But in the case of morality, it kind of comes back to this thing with colors. I like to use the colors analogy because you can't actually prove that other people are seeing the same colors that you are.
Right, but we're not talking about their subjective experience. Because if you want to claim that the subjective experience of colors is the same as the subjective experience of morality, then you might have a better argument here. But you're trying to conflate the objective electromagnetic spectrum that we can test and prove and know exists through machines and other various other methods is the same as people saying, okay, I believe that killing is wrong, versus someone else who believes that killing is okay under certain circumstances because the law says it's okay. So what I'm asking for is, if you're going to claim that morals are objective, we need more than just your opinion on it. We need something that we can see actually exists in the world and would still exist if you and your feelings disappeared.
So what I'm getting at is that you say that what you see is objective. So sight, this is objective, but what your conscience tells you, that is not.
Yeah, that would be a good distinction between the two.
Can you prove that what you sense through your conscience is not objective?
And again, you are shifting the burden of proof. We are for the argument, it says that objective morals are objective. And I'm asking you, how do we go about determining that those morals are in fact objective? Talking about sight and what we can prove about sight is just a red herring, because we have a vast amount of science that can demonstrate that, so it's not even a real question. And two, that doesn't get us anywhere to showing that morals are in fact objective.
Well, I would say then that it's going to be an inconsistency, because the whole science point that you're making, I think, is moot, because science is stuff that we determine via our sense of sight. So you can't do science without presupposing that your sight is valid. So to say, because I can use my sight to show me that...
We don't have to presuppose it, because we can test it, whether our sight is valid or not.
How do you test it?
Do you see whatever computer you're using in front of you?
Mm-hmm.
When you reach out and touch it with your fingers, does your sense of touch also verify that your sight is accurate?
Well, I mean, again, in a dream, I can have multiple senses, or in a hallucination,
Are
you can
you
have
asleep?
Not as far as I know, but if I was, I wouldn't know.
We don't have to bring up a dream, do we? So, as far as me and your co-host are going, we can verify that you are currently not hallucinating us.
But I can't verify that. Would be the thing.
Okay, well, if reality isn't real, then I don't know how you get to objective morality.
It's because I choose to believe my sense of sight, that what I sense is really there. But then I'm saying then is, if our sight, what we sense there through our eyes, if we're allowed to presuppose that as being true because we sense it, then why can the same not apply to matters of conscience?
And I've already explained that, because what we sense through our sights can be verified. What you're sensing through what you're calling objective morality, I've never seen anyone ever be able to verify objective morality. All you get is opinions. I believe that this is objectively wrong. Okay, I'm glad you believe that. Now, can you demonstrate that your belief is accurate?
Yeah, and we could put the same question back on you. You believe that the computer you're looking at is really there, but can you demonstrate that without presupposing that your sense perception is functioning correctly?
And we've already gone over this. We have entire science
and we have
exactly that.
We have gone over this, and I think we beat this dead horse a little bit. So let's move on. I mean, this is interesting. Darren, where would you like to go next on as far as another topic? Because I don't want to spend the whole show talking about morality.
Oh, come on! You don't want to beat a dead horse over and over and over again?
Nah, man. I already fell off it once, man. So.
I don't know. What do you guys think is the absolute best argument for Christianity?
Ooh.
You have to define best. Well, all right. So for Christianity or for theism?
Either, I guess.
Well, we'll talk about both. Let's do one for theism, and then we'll do one for Christianity. So, okay. Give one for theism, David. Go ahead.
All right. Well, it depends on what you mean by best, because do we mean in terms of proving the most, or are we terms of most defensible? Because I think that the teleological argument is the most defensible, but I think the ontological argument is best in that it proves the most.
Well, the one that you feel you can demonstrate that all the premises going into it are correct.
Yes. So let me just do this and get my hosting abilities here, because I'm kind of in like chill mode. So, okay. So David, go and lay out an ontological case and why do you think it's the best, and then Darren can talk about it. We'll do like 5 minutes on it and do a little back and forth for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go to the next one, and then we'll jump into Christianity.
Do you want me to do teleological or ontological?
Ontological first, and then the most defensible after, or the teleological afterwards.
All right, ontological is easy. I mean, I take Peter S. Williams' version of it. So basically, premise one: if it's possible that God exists, then God does exist. Premise 2, it is possible that God exists. Premise 3, therefore God exists. So that's a very simple argument, deceptively so, I would actually say. And then I guess I'll lay out a teleological argument after that.
Now, when you say possible, what do you mean? Are you talking about like logically possible, where anything you can imagine all of a sudden becomes possible? Or are you talking, I forgot the name of it, but the other possible where you're actually taking reality into consideration to determine whether something's possible or not?
I'm talking about logically possible and, not metaphysically absurd. So anything that is logically possible or not metaphysically absurd would be, yeah.
Yeah, I have very little use for logically possible because it doesn't actually demonstrate anything, because it doesn't actually take reality into consideration. I mean, for example, it's logically possible that you can roll a 7 on a standard 6-sided dice because you can imagine it. But once you get physics involved, it's no longer possible. So, so does this ontological argument work when you take reality into consideration, or is it a purely only works if you can, whatever you can imagine?
I mean, I'm not sure what you mean by taking reality into consideration. You're talking about taking the physical world into consideration? It would still work.
I mean, it's logically possible that I can flap my arms and fly to the moon.
Sure.
Because I can imagine it. But that's not possible in the real world.
Well, it's logically possible, but it's not actually possible.
Right, which is why logically possible is rather meaningless. It's not even, it doesn't make a coherent argument when you're talking about proving something exists in the real world.
Well, it is valuable when we're talking about disproving things. So, for example, if I were to say, my son is a married bachelor, we'd obviously know that that's just false by definition. It has to be, because you can't have a married bachelor.
Right? But consider the conversation is about what you can demonstrate is actually true. So if you want to say that it is possible that God exists, your second premise, then you're going to need more than just logically possible to prove that that actually is accurate. Because
why would I need more than logical possibility to prove that it's logically possible that God exists?
I didn't say that. I'm saying that you're going to have to prove that it's more than that. If you're talking about a God existing in the real world, you're going to have to show that it's more than just logically possible. Because if logically possible includes me being able to flap my arms and fly to the moon, then it is a completely pointless argument to say that God is logically possible. Because we're talking about what's actually possible in the real world, not what I can just sort of make up in my head and imagine happens.
Right. And that's why the second premise on its own doesn't lead to therefore God exists. The first premise is absolutely crucial, is that if it is possible that God exists, then God does exist. The second premise, the second premise that it is possible that God exists doesn't get you to the conclusion. So you have to have the first premise in there as well.
But the first premise doesn't work either, because just because it is logically possible that God exists doesn't mean that it's possible God exists in the real world.
Well, I would say it is if we understand God as being defined as a maximally great being, because a being that exists both in the mind and in reality is greater than a being that exists just in the mind. So if we understand God as being a maximally great being, then if it is possible that God exists, then God actually would exist, because otherwise God would not be a maximally great being if he did not exist, right?
Okay, so now all you have to do is demonstrate that God is a maximally great being, and that a maximally great being can exist in the real world.
Well, if it's logically possible, then it certainly can exist. But
no, it can't. Just because it's logically possible doesn't mean it can exist. Like I said, logically possible includes me flapping my arms and flying to the moon. But that we know that that's not actually possible in the real world. So just saying that it's logically possible is meaningless, because we know that some logically possible items is not possible to exist in the real world.
Sure, but they wouldn't be maximally great. So if God is a maximally great being, then he must exist necessarily, because that's part of what it means to be maximally great. If he didn't exist, then he wouldn't be maximally great.
Right. If he is maximally great. So now all you have to do is demonstrate that he is in fact maximally great.
Well, that's what it means. I mean, by definition, a maximally great being exists.
That's what you're claiming, yes. But now I'm asking you to demonstrate that your claim is accurate.
Right. And so that's when we would bring the argument into play. So if it is possible that a maximally
except
great
we already
being,
know that there's a difference between logically possible and possible in the real world, which is why saying that if he's logically possible is completely and totally meaningless, because just because he's logically possible doesn't mean it's possible he exists in the real world. We've already established that.
well, it is. If it's maximally great, then he by definition has to exist in the real world.
So you're defining him as maximally great, and maximally great says he exists in the real world. So you're saying that you're assuming he's maximally great, so you're assuming he exists in the real world because, I mean, the argument doesn't get off the ground because you have to say if he is maximally great. How did you determine that he is maximally great?
By definition, a maximally great being is maximally great. I mean, that's just part of what it means to be maximally great. This is the law of identity. It's a basic law of logic. A thing is identical to itself.
You seem to be completely missing my question. You're claiming that he is maximally great. How did you demonstrate that that claim is accurate? How is he just sort of great? Or maybe might be kind of great? Or not really great at all, but I really want to worship a maximally great being, so I'm going to claim that he's maximally great. Or, he even exists in the first place. Something that doesn't exist can't be maximally great.
Sure. And I mean, if it was, the argument wouldn't work on a being that was not maximally great, because a not maximally great being could possibly not exist. But a being that is maximally great has to exist because that's just part of what it means to be maximally great. Remember, I didn't say this is the most convincing argument out there. I really don't think, I've never heard anyone convinced by this argument. I just say it's the best in terms of what it proves and that it gets you the most fully orbed picture of God, because like a cosmological argument won't get you a God that is omniscient. It might get you one that is powerful, very powerful, possibly all powerful, but it's not getting you to a God who's omniscient. So I'm just saying this is the best in terms of a maximally great being is going to have every attribute, to its maximal extent. So it'll be all knowing, all loving.
Right, but what it doesn't. Right, but what it doesn't do is demonstrate that such a being actually exists. It says if such a being is logically possible, then it exists in the real world. But we already know that just because something is logically possible, it doesn't necessarily mean it exists in the real world. And you haven't demonstrated that maximally great is even a real thing.
Well, then I think the burden of proof would be on you to show that it's impossible to have a maximally great being, that you would be challenging the second premise of the argument.
No, that is shifting of the burden of proof. That is not how this works. You are making the claim about what a maximally great being is, that your God's a maximally great being. It's not my job to prove you wrong. You're the one making the claim. You are the one that has to demonstrate that what you're claiming is actually true.
All right, maybe it would help then if you said which premise you're disagreeing with. Do you disagree that if it's possible that God exists, then God does exist, or are you disagreeing that it's possible that God exists?
Well, I've already demonstrated that just because something is logically possible doesn't mean it's possible in the real world. So that takes out your first premise right there, because you're claiming that to claim that God is possible means logically possible. So right there, you have to demonstrate that just because something is logically possible in your first premise, that means that it actually exists in the real world. And you haven't demonstrated that maximally great is even a real thing. You haven't demonstrated that there's a being that is maximally great. You haven't demonstrated that the first premise is even a coherent one, because we know that just because something's logically possible, it doesn't mean it exists in the real world. Your first premise there has all sorts of problems with it.
All right, so this is interesting because the first premise is actually the one that philosophers like Graham Opie and stuff, they will actually grant the first premise of this argument, and they dispute the second one, that the idea of a maximally great being is logically possible. Because I'm just saying, if it is possible that a being that, by definition would have to exist, a maximally great being, then it would have to exist, right? Because that would just be part of what it means to be maximally great.
That is your claim. What I'm doing is asking you to demonstrate your claim is accurate.
Okay, so then do you disagree that a being that is maximally great would exist?
I see no reason to believe that there is such a thing as maximally great. I think that's just a thing that philosophers have made up to try to define a God into existence.
Sure, but if it existed, then
Well,
it would
right.
have to exist, right?
Okay, but if is the problem. You need to get beyond the hypothesis that if this happens, it exists, and demonstrate that it actually exists.
Well, for the first premise of the argument, I mean, I don't. For the first premise of the argument, all I need is if it's possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being does exist. Now, you're saying that the first premise has all kinds of problems with it, but the
Right.
first premise is saying if it is possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being does exist. So
And you
do
haven't
now
demonstrated.
grant.
You haven't demonstrated that it's possible for a max great being to exist. And what I'm
So now
asking
you're
you to
disputing the second premise?
just assume I'm disputing all of it.
Okay.
You haven't
Yeah.
demonstrated that.
Is there? Let me just interject here. Is there I mean, because it looks like you guys are kind of running around in circles here, and I haven't even been able to talk yet. But and we could save this to another show because we are getting a little bit into the last part of this show. But there seems to be a disconnect in description here. It seems like you guys are missing it. Like, like someone's not understanding something. Is there anything that we could be missing here as as understanding each other?
I mean, I'm missing which premise he's disputing, because I asked him once and he said the first premise has all kinds of problems with it. But then he granted that if it's possible that a maximally great being exists, then a maximally great being does exist. And so then he moved on to the second premise.
I didn't actually grant that.
Okay. So which premise do you disagree with? Or both?
I think he disagrees with both.
Yes, I disagree with both.
Okay.
So to disagree with the second one, you have to actually prove that God cannot exist. You'd have to show that the idea of a maximally great being is logically incoherent.
No, and that's fallacious, because that's shifting the burden of proof. If you want to claim that it is possible that a God exists, then you are the one that has to demonstrate that that is in fact correct.
I mean, things that are logically coherent are by definition logically coherent, right? There are no logical...
But you haven't demonstrated that a maximal great being is even logically coherent, because you haven't demonstrated that a maximal great being can even exist in the real world. And that's why I don't like logical possibilities, because logically possible means absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree. If something is logically possible, logical possibility is like a necessity before we can even assess something. So if something is logically impossible, then...
Well,
that means that...
Except it's logically possible that I flap my arms and fly to the moon, but we know that is not possible in the real world. So
it
just
is
because
logically possible in the real world,
which makes it completely meaningless, because we know it is not factually possible in the real world for that to happen.
Well, I mean, why would that be factually impossible? I mean, I would say if the constraints that we know about from natural laws and stuff apply, obviously, then yeah, that's not going to happen. But I mean, hypothetically, it's possible that, that
not even
God
hypothetically.
So are you saying that
if you want to claim that something can break the laws of physics, then you need to demonstrate that that is actually true. You can't just assume it as part of your argument. So it's not... And this is the problem I have with logically possible. It is completely and totally meaningless when you are trying to demonstrate something exists in the real world. Because you can go on and say pixies can magically lift me up and take me to the moon, but just because you can say that doesn't mean that it's possible it exists in the pixies can possibly exist in the real world.
All right, so maybe you're confusing then logically or possible with realistic, right? We would say it's not realistic that you could grow wings and fly to the moon. It's possible, but it's not realistic. Might be
no, it's not possible either. Everything we know about how physics works and biology and everything else shows us that it is not possible for us to grow wings and fly to the moon.
Okay, but can you prove that those laws will always hold, that they cannot be violated, etc.?
Well, if they don't, then we won't be around long enough to worry about it, because the entire universe will just disappear.
How do you know?
So then it is possible. So then it is possible that these laws could not hold.
I don't know that it is possible that it's for the laws to change.
It's not realistic. I will grant you it's not realistic. But
I don't even know if it's possible. I don't even know if it's possible. I mean, because we don't have enough information about how the laws are actually encoded into the universe itself in order to be able to determine whether it is actually possible for them to change or not.
Okay, but if you say then that you don't know, then doesn't it follow then that it at least could be possible?
No.
Why
It means because just because you are ignorant on a subject doesn't make something suddenly possible. That you're talking about a state of epistemology there, not a state of a fact of the universe.
Right, and we do begin with epistemology. I would take it for granted that epistemology precedes scientific endeavors.
Right, but this is supposed to be an argument for God existing in the real world, not an argument for what you believe God to be.
Sure, and what we are going from then is from the concept of a maximally great being, which does exist in our minds, that is, we can conceive of a maximally great being.
I'm not convinced you can conceive of a maximally great being.
Okay, so can we conceive of a being that is omniscient?
I don't see how.
So you would say that we can know things, right?
Yeah, we can know things.
Could you conceive of yourself knowing everything, or of something knowing everything? Like, theoretically, say you had a computer and we just kept adding information into it as we discovered things, and eventually, we discovered everything. There doesn't seem to be anything incoherent about that idea. And I'm not saying you actually have to be able to grasp all the information, but I'm just saying we can conceive of the general idea.
Well, I don't think you can conceive of the idea. I think you can say the words, but I don't think you can actually conceive of that idea.
Okay, so then if you're going to make that claim, it would seem that the burden of proof would be on you.
No. I'm saying that I have been given no reason to think that you can conceive of that idea. So if you can give me a reason to think that you can conceive of that idea, then I'd be happy to change my mind. But when you're making claims about what is and is not possible about the real world, you have to have more than I can't think of a way that couldn't happen, therefore it's possible.
That is normally how we conceive of possibilities.
Well, that doesn't mean that what you're doing is a coherent endeavor.
Okay, so then when people are, engaging in scientific endeavors, right, when people are proposing hypotheses and such, do you think that people have to demonstrate that the thing actually exists before they can, propose it as a hypothesis?
Well, no, but what I'm saying, but that's what I'm asking you to do. You've proposed your hypothesis. Now it's time to show that what you're hypothesizing actually exists. What you're hypothesizing is actually coherent. What you're hypothesizing actually does follow in the real world.
Okay, but things are generally assumed to be coherent unless there's a contradiction. Like, for example, the burden of proof is on the person who wants to claim that something is incoherent. So if I'm proposing a hypothesis, like say the hypothesis is that there is a maximally great being, if you want to say that's an incoherent idea, that would put the burden of proof on you.
I agree, but I'm not saying that. I'm saying I have not yet seen any reason to think it is a coherent concept, because it's like asking what is the maximally great number? Can you conceive of that? If you can, then I will take whatever your maximally great number is and add 1 to it. And then that becomes the next maximally great number. But we know that there is no limit to that maximally great. And so I'm not entirely convinced that you can conceive of a maximally great being. And if you want to claim that a maximally great being is a coherent concept, then you actually have to demonstrate that it's a coherent concept. And you have to do more than just say, well, I can't think of anything that makes it incoherent, therefore it's coherent. You actually have to demonstrate that it matches up with what we know to be true in the real world.
So would you believe in, say, like the theory of evolution? Would you have to demonstrate that this is a coherent theory before you can propose it as an explanation for biological data?
That's what Darwin had to do, yeah.
How can you prove it's...
He had to actually go out, find the evidence, and he did, I think it was like 8 or 12 years of research before he published his work. So yes, if you want to go ahead and if you want to make claims about how the world works, you need more than just, I can't think of a reason why this wouldn't work. You need to actually go out and demonstrate that that is in fact how the world works.
Okay, but now you're talking about applying it to reality. That's, ontology. But you were saying you're not convinced it's coherent and that we have to demonstrate that it is coherent before we can do it. And that's a very different claim, because I would agree with you that saying something is coherent and then saying this is how it is, that is a different sort of claim. But,
right, but that's what I'm asking you to do, is demonstrate that the claims that Christians are making actually are accurate, that they are how reality actually works.
Okay, so do you remind me, because you had asked me before to demonstrate that the idea of a maximally great being is coherent. Are you asking me to demonstrate that this is actual or that it's coherent?
Either. If you can do either, that's fine with me.
Okay, because the thing on the coherence issue is, as I was going back to my illustration or my counterexample of evolution, can you demonstrate that the theory of evolution is coherent? Or can you just not think of a reason that it would not be? And
No,
if you can't demonstrate that the theory of evolution is coherent, then can I not, by the same standard, say, well, then I'm justified in not believing in the theory of evolution because you haven't demonstrated its coherence to me?
well, that's two separate questions there. One, if someone hasn't demonstrated that something's coherent, you are fully justified in not believing it. Two, yes, we can demonstrate that it is coherent because, well, we have 150 years of thousands of people doing research on it all over the world that shows that it is coherent. It makes predictions. We've learned new things about the world. It matches up with physics, everything. So yes, we can demonstrate that it is coherent. And yes, you are justified in not believing it is coherent if you haven't actually taken a look at the evidence.
Okay, so it seems to me that you just cited off that, hey, we have people doing research with this theory. I mean, I can do you one better than that. We've got thousands of years of people working with ontological arguments and people trying to disprove the idea that God is coherent and none of them succeeding. So, I mean, if you can just say
the difference
Okay.
The difference there is that people doing research into evolution can demonstrate that their claims are how reality actually works. Whereas the people that have been looking into the claims about God, they're doing mostly just speculation. I mean, I can't even get you to demonstrate that, it's possible that God exists, or to demonstrate that a maximally great being is even a real thing. So, I mean, taking an awful lot of effort to sort of go over everything else except what I actually asked you about.
Well, you had asked originally what the best argument for God's existence was in terms of, and this was in terms of which one proves the most. That's why I was going ontological. As I said before, I don't think it's the best in terms of, that it's convincing or anything. But, to say that you have to demonstrate the coherence of something, that seems like a very odd claim to me, because, again, you can't demonstrate the coherence of evolution. We just assume it's coherent unless someone can demonstrate its incoherence. Generally, anything is considered to be coherent unless it can be demonstrated or it's just obvious that the thing is incoherent. So
Well,
I don't see any.
Well,
No, go ahead, David. Just let David finish up, and then we're gonna jump for the last couple minutes here on the teleological.
I was happy to give Darren the last word on that one.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, just finish what you're saying. We'll let Darren respond, and then we'll move on.
Well, I mean, that was it. I was just saying it seems very odd to me to claim that someone has to demonstrate that something is coherent, that something is logically possible. Typically, a thing is assumed to be logically possible. A concept is assumed to be logically possible unless you can demonstrate that it's incoherent. This is an assumption that we make, like in all of our scientific research. No one has to demonstrate that a hypothesis is coherent before they have to work off of it. So, I mean, I don't know of any philosophical objector to the ontological argument who says you have to demonstrate that God is philosophically coherent before I have to take the argument seriously. Instead, the philosophical atheist will go after the second premise and try to show that it is actually not possible for God to exist.
Yeah, and you'll find I really don't care what philosophers think about how things go about. They're not the ones that are putting SUV-sized robots on Mars. And so the fact that philosophy has taken that position is not really surprising to me, because philosophy is not in the business of demonstrating how reality works. They're in the business of speculating about different ideas. Whereas in the sciences, if you want if you have a hypothesis and you want people to take you seriously and you want funding for how to, so that you can test your hypothesis, you do in fact have to demonstrate that it is a coherent hypothesis, that it works with current known physics, and that it at least has some semblance of legs under it. And that's how we get YouTube videos and explore our universe.
Okay. Well, David, we're at the last couple minutes here, last 5 minutes. I pretty much gave the mic to you. I didn't plan it to go this way, but yeah, I wanted to talk about the emails that me and you have sent back and forth, and yeah, we didn't go that route. So last 5 minutes, we'll go to the teleological, just lay about a brief case. We're going to give it 5 minutes. I'm actually going to be kind of a time Nazi on this one, so I'm going to interrupt probably. Is that cool?
Sure.
All right, go ahead.
All right, so the strongest teleological argument, in my opinion, would be the one from biological information in the cell. So this would be the basically DNA to design argument, and it's an abductive argument, not a deductive argument. So basically, sorry about that. So basically, the argument would be that we have information, biological information, and that information can only come from an intelligent mind. And so since we find this information in the cell, it makes sense to attribute it to an intelligent mind. So that would be basically how the case would look. And there's a lot of details in there. I hope you heard that. I had a phone ring in the back. All right.
Okay, so I guess the next question is can you demonstrate that information can only come from intelligence? Because biologists all over the world seem to disagree with that, since, you know, they tend to think that evolution's a thing.
Well, here's the thing. Evolution depends on the existence of biological information. So you cannot have evolution apart from biological information, because life depends on information and evolution depends on life. So you can't invoke evolution as being the cause of biological information, at least the origin of biological information, because evolution presupposes biological information. You could say that evolution adds more information through mutation to whatever information already exists. But until you already have that first DNA strand, you're not having any evolution.
Yeah, no biologist is going to recognize what you just said as being valid. But that really wasn't my question. My question was, can you demonstrate that information can only come from an intelligence?
Well, Darren, I personally know biologists that do actually I've talked to them before, and they do actually accept that. But nonetheless, I'll let David respond, and we are coming up to the last minute.
No, I would just say that in all of our experience, we only have one known source for information. That would be intelligence. Inference to the best explanation would be, or a best explanation would be a cause now in effect that we know is able to cause whatever is in question. We know that intelligence can cause information, therefore intelligence is the best explanation of the information in the cell. Does that absolutely prove that there couldn't be another cause? No, but if someone has a better hypothesis or wants to propose a better hypothesis, the burden of proof is clearly on them.
Well, and biologists would say that they have proven that.
Through what? The RNA world, that's dead. You're not doing it through the Miller-Urey experiment. We know that that has no relevance to origin of life research. In fact, it's just admitted that it's a mystery right now among biologists. They have no idea how life started.
No, but they know how information changes through natural selection.
When it already exists, but they can't explain the origin of it.
Right, but their ignorance isn't proof for your position.
Well, it is proof that intelligence is currently the only known explanation for the origin of the DNA.
Except we already know that's false, because we know that physics, chemistry, all of that works to create the DNA molecule. So
there are no experiments.
It's called chemistry. It's called chemistry. Yeah.
I will recommend synthetic chemist James Tour. He says that we have no idea. In fact, principally, just from what we know
again,
about
our ignorance is not proof for your position.
It is proof that it's the best explanation, though, that we currently have.
No, it doesn't, because evolutionary biologists are not going to agree that intelligence is guiding evolution. It's completely random process.
Again, you can only have evolution after you have biological information. So you can't say that this system, or this, not system, but this process that critically depends on the existence of pre-existing genetic information is responsible for the origin of that same genetic information. It's a chicken and egg problem.
Yep. And that's it, gentlemen. We just hit the end. And I just want to come in here right now and thank Darren for coming on. Thanks to David for giving the responses that he gave. It was fun, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Darren.
Any last words for you guys? Hey, Darren, would you be interested to come back on and discuss these things further?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, we could just do this like a round table or something every once in a while.
Sure, sounds like fun.
All right, man. Well, that's the end of the show today, guys. I hope everybody... David, you have any last words here?
No, yeah. Thanks again for coming on, Darren. I've enjoyed the discussion.
So, Darren, is there any way that we can get a hold of you, or any of our listeners, get a hold of? Is there anything that you write? Do you blog? Do you do anything?
No, I'm completely boring. I don't do any of that.
You're not boring, buddy. We love to talk, and we love to talk to you about this stuff. It's really fun. So, but anyways, guys, have a good day. And this is PRA Podcast, and we are out.